Massarano, and I teach at the Seattle Jewish Community School in Seattle, Washington. And this coming year, we are moving to a cohort model, a multi-aged cohort model. So my first cohort is our middle cohort of 7, 8, and 9-year-olds. And I'll also be teaching our upper cohort of 9, 10, and 11-year-olds, which amounts to 2nd through 5th grade. Last year, which is when I did my work with BetterLesson and my fabulous coach, Kim, I was teaching 1st grade and 5th grade last year. I was telling someone that when I went from my 1st grade classroom into my 5th grade classroom, sometimes back to back, I would stand at the 5th grade door and I would turn my body around so that I knew that I was in a different developmental age, right? I started teaching when I was 16, when at my congregation they needed a Hebrew teacher for the 4th grade class, and I started in a supplemental program. I've taught in the Los Angeles Unified School District as well as in Jewish Day School. I have a great story about how I got to Seattle. Ask me about it afterwards. And my life motto is treat people well and leave the world a little better off than when you arrived. This is my amazing family. My eldest son and his wife, me in the middle, my older son, and my brother and his son, Bezalel, and my daughter, Abby. So Nathaniel, Nancy, Micah, and Abby are mine. I claim them. And we love to do puzzle break rooms. If you haven't done one, they're quite amazing. All right, moving on. So what are we doing? We are in the domain of ownership, choice, and voice. When I was provided the opportunity through the Samus Foundation of Seattle to participate in BetterLesson, although I've been teaching for over 40 years, I took the opportunity for free coaching, which I am always open to learning and happy to do so. And they asked us to really focus in, and if you're doing the design studio in the next couple of days, they're going to ask you to choose a domain to focus in. You don't have to stick with it. I changed mine in the process, which can happen. And I chose ownership, choice, and voice. And the reason being, the 5th grade class I had last year, I taught the previous year as 4th graders. And in that 4th grade class, I learned, and it stayed the same for 5th grade as well. I had 14 students with at least 5 different Hebrew skill levels. And in looking at my Jewish studies lessons and my text-based lessons, how was I going to approach having all of those different skill levels and different emotional and social levels? And this was a group of kids that did not collaborate well together. So choosing small groups was a really difficult task. So I wanted to pick the ownership, choice, and voice, and I needed to be able to differentiate my learning for all of these different things that were happening in this relatively small class of 14. So that's an example. It's okay. That was an example of a choice board. Not the one that I used, which I'll give you in a second. So just as a review, if you don't already know, this is what ownership, choice, and voice is. This is straight off the BetterLesson website. You can check that out some more if you would like. But it's essentially really focused in on students taking ownership of their learning and making their own choices. Next slide. All right. So as I said, why did I pick this one? We had at least 4 levels of Hebrew. I have different levels of engagement. So there were several students in the class who were identified on the autism spectrum. I had 3 kids on the autism spectrum, and I had 4 kids, 2 of those overlapped, who were in an ADHD situation, or ADD, depending on which labels you like to use. And there were students who were brand new to the school and had 0 Jewish knowledge, 0 interest in Jewish studies. And I also had students who were advanced, and their reading levels were high school reading levels and very sophisticated in their questioning and very sophisticated in their desire for learning. I also learned from the previous year, I wanted to address some of the disruptive behaviors in the past. This was the hardest class I've ever taught in 40 years. They pushed me to be my most professional self. They pushed me to find new and different ways to engage them. They pushed me to find new and different ways to manage the classroom, because it was and is a very difficult group of kids. So these are all the things that motivated me to think about how do I do this differently so that I can get everybody as engaged as possible. So using the domain and the different tech tools that I learned, I think that was one of the best things I learned in the design studio, was they flooded me with tech tools to try, and then I kept getting more all year long, which was great. It allowed the students to practice autonomy in their learning, and it allowed the students to feel a sense of accomplishments and success, and it engaged at the skill level for the student. And for me, it allowed me to quickly and easily assess the students and give individual times to students that needed it. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go. Next slide. All right, through my work with Coach Kim, I decided to first try academic choice boards. Will you click on this one, please? So we were studying the Parashat Shalach Lecha in the book of Numbers. I gave them a tic-tac-toe, do 3 in a row. And as you can see, each of these has a differentiated level of requirements in terms of text understanding. We were working on just finding the spot in the Chumash, in the book that we were using, because many of the students had no knowledge of how to even use a Chumash and had to be taught how to do that. So this was like a very beginning skill. And then later on and down in another area, we've got different processing things. I also had one, bump down. I always try to have a right side of the brain and a left side of the brain activity. So typically in all of my choice boards, there's a create an illustration, comic story based, or something on the right side of the brain and not just on the left. This is a technique in this box, if we can jump down just a little bit, that write a short essay answering beginning with the following sentence. After they've read the chapters, what do you know? I notice, I appreciate, I wonder. That was language we were practicing in our class regularly, so I asked them to give me a short essay doing that. And working with the teacher in terms of integrated learning, we had already done the work in language arts, which I helped support intentionally, learning how to, the essay structure in terms of opening sentence, how many supporting sentences, and things like that. So we would review what was needed, particularly for the essay pieces. Use the information you have learned in this tic-tac-toe to create a word search or a crossword puzzle, right? So I'm having them utilize some of the things that they've got to make their own puzzles that were then passed out and used during morning meeting or as kids were coming into class, things like that. All right, back to, and then after we did this introductory one at the beginning of the year, the kids said, do we have to do 3 in a row? Can I just pick the ones that I want? So then when I created the Chukat, when we were studying Parashat Chukat, I then gave the students a list, a checkoff list, and said, just pick 3, right? Pick whatever 3 you want. And again, there were tech tools that they had to use. Kahoot is one of the most famous ones that the kids just absolutely loved. They created their own Kahoot. And then on Friday afternoon, the worst time of the week to teach, when I had them at 1:15 before Shabbat, we did Kahoot for half an hour, and everybody had their own Kahoot, and it took 4 minutes, whatever. It was great. Then there were things like write a 5 to 9 sentence essay answering the question, do you believe the Chukat rebellion was justified, right? There are also times when I would bring in commentators and have them read Rabbi Jonathan Sachs and his opinions on them and synthesize or create a play based on what you read or work with other people with different activities. So these are just some of the examples of some of the things that we created to make a choice with regard to their learning. The thing that this did, which I think some of the other presentations that I have sat on touch on, while the first time I did this, I think this might be in the next slide, the first one in terms of what I did, well, I'm sorry, not quite yet. The first one took me about 3 hours to prep. But in the classroom, I was completely free to engage with students, completely. I was not wondering what was the next part of my lesson. I was not distracted by, oh, do I have all the materials out and ready to go? I was 100% present for my students, which allowed me to touch base with those that needed the support that they needed. It allowed me to make sure that the people who would benefit from working together were connected and benefiting working together. They could do things together, by the way. They didn't have to do everything on their own. All right, next slide. After doing all this, I brought in Massaranos. If you were in one of the first workshops, Massaranos asked a student to self-assess where they are in their learning. So I would present something and have them self-assess. And if they are a 1 or a 2, that usually was time spent with me in a small group doing an activity or a lesson together. And then it allowed particularly my student who's working on the high school level to really excel. And he often would come to me and say, hey, I don't want to do this activity. Can I do this instead? It's like, absolutely. He often created his own activities to accelerate his own learning. We had an agreement ahead of time, which was really helpful because then it wasn't the disruptive behavior that it was last year, right? Okay, I also sent the link over to the BetterLesson video with, I think, Andrew, right? Isn't that your video? Very good. We don't have to watch it. It's okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, this is Daniel.
It's Daniel. Yeah. There you go. Yeah. So feel free to watch that. It's really wonderful. I actually think he puts them up at the board with an activity down. So there will be an activity for 1s, an activity for 2s to pick up and go with. All right. Next slide. How did I know it had a positive impact? Number 1, everybody got it done, including my 3 students who never got anything done the previous year, ever. My 3 most difficult students always finished their assignments. Number 2, there was no complaining, and there were no fall aparts and breakdowns, which I had been having the previous year. They were rare and far and few between, right? And they asked for more, right? Can we have more of these? And we kept going more. Next slide. The lessons I learned, the first one took a lot longer than the others. Once I had really had a sense of how much it would take me to put it together. It got easier to do as I went along. Solicit feedback. That was really important from my coach, from other teachers, from the students themselves. The feedback from the kids helped me design things as I kept going along. Adapt, be flexible. Sometimes it doesn't go the way you expect it, right? As all of us as teachers know. Next slide. All right, so we're going to try one, right? So imagine an upcoming lesson for your curriculum. The way that I then did is I brainstormed lots of very different ways to do it. Short ways, medium ways, long ways, easy, difficult, activities, skills, knowledge, values. I used Bloom's taxonomy and asked all different kinds of questions. For my list of 9 on the tic-tac-toe, do 3 in a row, I had at least 13 ideas. Sometimes, by the way, I would throw out a Google Doc to my 5 family members, my 5 children that I claim, and said, hey, give me ideas on what to do with this. And they just garbage dumped because they are 30-somethings, 20 and 30-somethings, and have a different way of thinking about the world. And they brought in all kinds of interesting, crazy things to do, and it was super helpful.
Can we send them too?
Yes. I think you should cultivate your own group of 30-somethings. But seriously, I'm in my late 50s. I function differently in the world than my 20 and 30-somethings, so I'm tapping that brain in a different way that my brain just doesn't tap, right? All right, in arranging it, I wanted to have everyone do a text-based activity, so I tried to make sure that was included. So often, one column would be text-based, one column would be synthesis, one column would be right brain something. So I tried to get them to do 3 in a row. Sometimes somebody did all the text-based ones. Great, right? Some people, it's fine. I was not going to sweat that, right? I tried to make sure that there were a good variety of things to do, both left hand and right hand, and timing. How long do they have to complete this? Most of the time, I had about 4 hours a week of lessons with them, and I often did each of these across a whole week period of time. And rarely was it do this in 45 minutes and get it done, because a lot of these things I wanted them to take time and really build upon their learning and do other things with it. I'm about to enter into a new model. The new model is this cohort model. And I am going to be using these academic choice boards a lot. I will have, for example, in one cohort last year, the second grade in their Israel unit did regions and cities. And the third graders did famous Israelis. Those two curricula are going to be in my bailiwick, if you will, in that particular cohort to accomplish for the year across a 2-year span. So one of the things that I'm thinking about right now in order to do that is to create choice boards for each of these curricula, and students will then be able to choose which one they want to do. If you would be normally a second grader, you don't have to choose the regions and cities. You could choose the Israeli guys or gals, or vice versa. Or let's say next year when we do this again, if they did famous Israelis last year and they want to do famous Israelis again, great. Or somebody who says, I am not interested in cities and regions, I want to do this, no problem. It allows for a lot of choice on the part of the kids, which that brings the engagement. I think those are the pieces that pull them to be engaged in what they're doing, because they are making their own decisions about their learning. I often talk about the perception of control. When I'm working with students really we are autonomous beings wanting control of our world. So when we give them a perception of control, saying, do any of these you want, you control what you get to learn, when in actuality, I'm the one doing the control because you have to do one of these, right? So those are some key things there. Good. All right, questions? Yeah?
I want to know about how did you combine the Massarano with the choice board?
So I actually didn't combine the two of them, right? So I did some choice boards. I did them in different, like I said, I did some that were tic-tac-toe 3 in a row. I did some that were choose 3 randomly. And then I did one of the big academic choices and had kids choose to do it with another person. So I've done it in more than individual work. But when I did the Marzanos, I had individual assignments for them to do. Yeah. That was just an adaptation.
But during the choice board, there was different levels of choices. How did you make sure that they're not going to choose too easy? Or?
So my 3 most difficult students, the very first time they did it, they picked all the 3 easy ones. They were done really fast, and then they had like free time for a period in order to read or do whatever the options were after they were done. The next time around, I individually pulled them aside completely by themselves and say, hey, this is what we're going to be doing. Think a little bit differently about this time, and see if you can push yourself to try one that's a little bit outside your comfort zone, right? And each of them stepped up, and the trick was when they wanted to try and work together, those 3 together was a really hard combination, and they asked to try and work together. And look, I pulled them aside and I said, look, I'm really hesitant about this because my past experiences, this hasn't really worked. And they're like, yeah, but we know how to do this now on our own and we think we can do it. It's like, and they were great. They were really great. We didn't do that on everything because they still slipped, obviously, but when they had the choice boards and a specific activity to accomplish, and they understood how to do it, it worked really well.
So how do you assess the work?
A lot of times is, did you complete the assignment? Did you do 3 in a row? Did you choose, if I asked you to choose 1 text, 1 essay, and 1 creative right brain side, did you do those 3 things? I am assessing, it's really subjective, it's not objective in this case, right? There were certain things that were objective, just so you know. Often I would say, take this text in Hebrew and find 10 shorashim, 10 root words that you can recognize and identify and translate that you know, make a list of them. sometimes it was as simple as that, and that's a very objective check. You did 10, right? But a lot of this is subjectively assessed. And I will tell you that, so one of the activities that they had to do, which was semi-project-based learning, is last year as a fourth graders, they were assigned to create the Magid for the Pesach play, basically, the Magid section. And I saw that they were not good collaborators. So my goal of the 4 weeks of creating the Pesach play was to teach them how to collaborate with one another. So I created your job every day had 2 tasks. They got a half sheet of paper. The first task was read your chapter from Exodus that you're going to be working on. And second is say the words, "That's a great idea," and. I fed them these things, and they had a check off. And at the bottom, I gave them a self-assessment. Today, I successfully did both tasks. Today, I wonder if tomorrow I could, I had them do a quick self-assessment on the bottom really fast. And they were graded, basically, if you're talking about assessment, is how well did you learn how to collaborate? And they had really very discrete tasks every day. And they pulled it off amazing. Look, I learned that the Pesach play is not the end goal. The Pesach play is the life skill of learning how to collaborate, right? And if you learn the Pesach story, great. If you learn how to collaborate, oy vavoy, that's the best one, right? So I really think that for me, it's about learning how to function in the world and less about the content. So. Okay. Thank you.